Great. I'm actually going to use the mic this morning so that it's loud and proud. How does that sound? Loud and proud. That's exactly what it sounds like. Thanks, Tony. This morning we need Bibles, and so let's get Bibles out right away. We're going to be in Titus 2. When's the last time you were in Titus? We're going to be in Titus 2 this morning, and so you guys can flip there. Once somebody has the page number, if you could tell us all so we have the page for the big blue Bibles. Titus chapter 2. If you need help, there's a table of contents in the very beginning of the Bible. It's not a shameful thing to look at the table of contents. It's not. You don't have to flip through the whole Bible feeling like a dummy. I don't know where it is. That's okay. Look at the table of contents and learn where it is. Takes practice. Nice throw. Nice catch. So we're going to be in there. As you are flipping there, I want those of you who feel maybe a little bit more, I keep getting these words mixed up, inept or adept, whatever, I don't know. For those of you who feel good at math, how many decisions do you think you make in a day?
Too many.
Oh, that's counting. Come on. I want to hear a few numbers, and I'll tell you higher or lower. Great. How many decisions do you think on average you make in a day?
Too many.
Too many. Two. Higher than 2. 600. Higher than 600. Wait. It was 2,000. Higher than 2,000. Wait. Lower than 1 million. 10,000. Higher. Okay, no.
13.
More than 13,000. Higher. Wait. What'd you say? 500,000. Lower.
450.
No, way lower. Keep going. 20,000. Higher. Higher than 30. Lower than 50.
375.
That's wrong. We've said in between 42 and 30.
45.
In between 42 and 30. On average, you make 35,000 decisions in a day. And you all are like, there's no way. There's no way. But how many decisions have you made this morning without even really thinking much of it? You chose to hit snooze this morning. That was a decision that you chose. Or you didn't. That's fine. It's still a choice. You chose between this shirt or this dress or these pair of pants, or you chose your breakfast food or you chose not to have breakfast. That is still a decision. You are constantly making decisions, and I'll tell you what, most of them you're just not thinking about because it's like, why is it super important for me to think through those decisions? You make about 35,000 decisions in a day. And yet we think we make so many less than that because we're really only aware of like the 15 that we feel like matter, right? You're like, what am I going to watch on Netflix? Like, that's really what matters tonight. I need to make sure I don't waste my time, and so I better have something good. But I think it's pretty obvious to state that saying no to one thing, saying no to Frosted Flakes, and saying yes to Honey Nut Cheerios is a decision in itself, but there has to be things. For there to be a choice, there has to be things to say yes to, and there has to be things to say no to. All throughout my life, I think of some of the biggest times when I had to say no to something, and I'm actually really glad that I did. First, I remember when I was working at the NBA, not award show, it was NBA All-Star Weekend in LA, and I had this moment when I was walking past Russell Westbrook and Guy Fieri. And in my mind, it crossed my mind, I was like, I just want to grab both of them. Like, I just want to say, I've touched Russell Westbrook and Guy Fieri, or Fieri, as you should say. I had both of them, but praise God I didn't do that. Otherwise, I probably would have gotten decked in the face by a chef and a basketball player. I think of also, speaking of being decked in the face, I think of when I planned on fighting Jeremiah in 7th grade. Jeremiah was a lot bigger than me, and pushed one of my friends on my way to class, and I stood up for my friend and said, don't do that, and he says, same time tomorrow. And so we actually just showed up same time the next day, same spot, and I was about to get my butt kicked, but I was like, I'm going to stand up for my friend. And that same friend thankfully stood up and came between us, and he's like, Tony, it's not worth it. I would have gotten whooped. And so thank goodness that I was like, oh, yeah. I'm going to listen to my friend. I'm not going to fight Jeremiah. Jeremiah would have whooped me. Maybe also my wedding, I decided no to traditional dessert and yes to root beer floats. I thought that was just so cool. You're like, that's lame. I thought it was cool. I said no to traditional cake, and we had root beer floats at our wedding. It's the one thing Natalie said that I could have a say in. And then a bigger one, when I was a sophomore in college, you guys have heard this so many times because this is a huge part of my story. I said no to dating for a year. It was huge for me because all of my life from 6th grade on, I had been in a relationship or seeking a relationship all the time. Like I would never go longer than 3 months, that whole span of time. What is that, 7, 8 years? I never went longer than 3 months without trying to pursue a girl. And so it was huge for me that year to say, you know what, God, like I'm not going to date this year. There's some huge no's in our life that we maybe look back and we're like, thank you. Like, I'm so glad I said no to that. I'm so glad I said no to wearing the same t-shirt as Tony today because I would look like a fool. Actually, it's a plain black shirt. So, you look great. But we can't talk about saying no to things that we said no to intentionally without also thinking of the things that maybe we should have said no to. A list, again, for me, I think of 6th grade Tony should have said no to breaking into a house to go airsofting. Yep, think on that one. Should have said no to eating really, really rich foods this week when I've been on a diet for the last month. Should have said no to that. I should have said no as a senior in high school to doing a hip-hop dance routine in front of 500 people. And, I hate saying this part, to where I actually even took off my shirt.
No.
Yes, I did. My parents were there. I know. A little bit more serious, I should have said no in high school to hanging out with girls at night. I should have said no to that. Because I knew what I was putting myself, the situation I was putting myself into. And I look back and I know now that I should have said no to treating people as tasks. And what I mean by that is so often I can get so wrapped up in what I'm doing that I forget that people need relationship, not things for me to accomplish for them. I should have said no to those things. We make so many decisions in our life and we forget that they're so big and so important. And as we finish up the series, as we're looking at Auxano to grow, we need to understand that God desires for us to say no intentionally to things. He actually says that we will grow, we will become more like Him if we say no to things that we need to say no to. But why? Why does God care? Because God wants to be Lord of your life, meaning He wants to be one who speaks into the decisions that you make. That if you're following Jesus, it's not just about what I get to decide for my life, but that God actually has a plan. We love saying that, but then when we see His plan, it's like, no, that's not good. I have a better plan. We rarely say that out loud, but sometimes our actions really preach that message. God is extremely interested in how we make our life choices, and He wants us to follow Him because He's in charge. And so with that, as we look through the series, as I emphasized earlier, we've talked about that growth is necessary, that growth takes time. And really the picture that comes to mind, like it was in 1 Corinthians 3, as Paul's talking to the church of Corinth, that these two people had come through. Paul had preached the message of the gospel. Apollos came in. This other guy did the same exact thing. And people were arguing between who was better, like Apollos or Paul. And Paul says in 1 Corinthians 3, he said, I watered, Apollos planted, but the Lord causes it to grow. I love the illustration of looking at spiritual growth with a plant that needs sunlight, that needs water, that needs to be cared for, that needs to be tended to. We can't treat our spiritual lives, we can't treat following Jesus like it's just something in the past. It needs to be something actively being looked at and cared for, being fed, getting the sun, light. That is so significant for us to be able to grow. And so, as I said, we're going to be in Titus 2 this morning as we look to saying no. What's it mean to say no and to grow in that way? So let me pray before we look at it, and then we'll continue on. Father, thank you for your word. I ask that, Lord, that we would each submit to it. Lord, especially me in this moment, may I not be someone who tries to be creative or fancy for my own gain, but Lord, that people might know you. May your word reign true in the hearts of the people in this room. And God, may you impact us so evidently that we have to give you the praise. God, we love you and praise your name today. Amen. So the context of Titus. This is a letter written by, take a guess, Paul. And he's writing a letter to Titus, who's this guy who's doing ministry in this place called Crete. which you don't really hear about Crete often because it's a little island that is off to the west of Israel area. And so he's doing, Titus is doing ministry in this small little spot. And you get this little letter that's written to Titus from Paul of saying, like, this is what your life needs to look like. This is what your church needs to look like. And it's really this one letter that's giving a summary to, like, all the ministry that's going on there. And there's this verse in Titus 1:16 that really kind of captures this whole idea of the book of Titus. It says, they profess to know God, but they deny him with their works. Talking about the people in the church there. They profess to know God, but they deny him with their works. And what Paul is unpacking is those two things don't go hand in hand. If you know God, your actions show that you know God. If you truly know him. That you need to actually be living a life that shows and proves that. It's not that you're trying to prove it to earn anything, but your life will naturally flow out of that way if you know God and you're in relationship with him. So that's what this is all about, that true faith leads to practice. And so what we're looking at today, specifically, in the passage of Titus 2:11-14, is that Jesus changes everything, and so we need to act like it. That's really all I want us to walk away with today. Jesus changes everything, and so we have to act like it. So look at verse 11. For the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people, training us to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in the present age, waiting for our blessed hope, the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior Jesus Christ, who gave himself for us to redeem us from all lawlessness and to purify for himself and people for his own possession, who are zealous for good works. I appreciate that it starts off this way in verse 11, saying that for the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people. Before he goes on to say anything of like, you need to change your life, you need to clean it up, it says, remember, for the grace of God has appeared. Grace is a very churchy word, but what it means is that it's a gift of something, receiving something that you want or you need that you do not deserve. And so it's saying that Jesus he gave himself, that he was gracious, that because of God's grace, he offers himself to us, a free gift to people who didn't deserve it. And he offers salvation. And I love in this idea is that as we look to the fact that God gave us grace, undeserved love, undeserved anything, that he would go and do that for us, that we see that God is actually trying to help us understand that he's not trying to just change our actions, he's actually trying to change our hearts. I want us to hear that this morning. He's not trying to change your actions, he's trying to change your heart. Why? Because if your heart changes, your actions will naturally change. God is one who's not trying to control your behavior, he's trying to change your heart and trying to see and show you that he desires your heart to know him, your true inmost being. And that God's grace, his free gift, would forgive sin and offer his perfection to all. As I was looking at this message of how Jesus changes everything, I just had this picture of like a bomb diffuser. How many of you guys ever seen a movie or seen like a picture of like what a bomb diffuser wears? Anybody? Think like giant spacesuit. Anyways, I got this picture of a bomb diffuser of just this idea that sin, what it does is it straps you into a time bomb. It just straps you in, and there's nothing you can do to try to take it off of you without detonating it. It kills. Sin destroys us. It separates us from God. And what God does is he sends Jesus as the ultimate bomb diffuser, and Jesus gets there and he says, you know what? Somebody has to blow up. Somebody has to, because of the way this is designed. And so, you know what? I'm going to take this off of you and put it on myself so that you can have my suit and go and be safe from any bombs in the future. It's a crazy, like, I was like debating whether or not I should share it, but really like this idea that Jesus has to take the punishment for sin. It's not just that he kind of kicks us out and says, you're good, we're all good, but he takes it on and he actually dies on the cross. He blows up. If you follow this illustration, he blows up and it resurrects from the grave 3 days later. And what the craziest part about it to me is that we continue to have Jesus' righteousness. Meaning that when God looks at us, if you are a follower of Jesus, when God looks at you, he sees Jesus' perfection. That you are no longer the way you were before. You're no longer strapped to the time bomb. You are no longer defined by sin, but you are defined by Jesus. You're defined by his blood. You're defined by his righteousness. There's nothing that can take that off of you. That is a free gift. That is His grace. That is abundance of anything, more than anything we could ever ask for. He just gives it to you. So what that means is that your life is very different than it was before. If you are a follower of Jesus, your life has changed dramatically. The way that God sees you, what you are defined by, is so different than it has ever been. You are not the way you once were. Therefore, if you are in Jesus, there is no need to fear death. No need to fear sin. No need to fear anything in this world. There's no need to question God's love for you. There's no need to question the God-given value that He's placed on you. And there's surely no need for us to act like temptation is greater, is larger than God, that our sin is larger than God. I want us to look at Romans 5 for a moment. Looking at verse 6. You don't have to hop there if you can follow along. Romans 5 verse 6. For while we were still weak at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. For while we were still weak at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. Jumping over also to Romans 6, verse 5. For if we have been united with Him in a death like His, we shall certainly be united with Him in a resurrection like His. For we know that our old self was crucified with Him in order that the body of sin might be brought to nothing, so that we would no longer be enslaved to sin. I love this illustration that your old self is gone. What you were defined by is completely out the door. It's been kicked out. It's been annihilated. And Jesus is giving you a new self. Just by claiming, Jesus, I call you Lord, I call you my Savior, and I give you my life, I follow you. And so the old self is long gone. It was left at the cross, and we get to act like that's the case. Before we go any further, I want us to acknowledge that there's this idea that's often creeps into our minds or into our hearts that maybe we actually have to act like we're following Jesus, but really, Jesus is doing nothing for you. It's so easy to come into a place like this and to see how other people are acting, to see what other people are doing, see other people raising their hands in worship and to say, okay, this is what I got to do to fit in. I got to kind of sneak in and make sure that no one's asking questions. I kind of got to play the part so that I don't have to change my life, but that at least here I just fit in and I don't really have to do anything differently. Why are you trying so hard? Jesus cares about you so much, and He wants you to have Him. You don't have to try to fit in. You don't have to try to look like the best HSM student you could possibly look like. Jesus wants you to follow Him as an individual. He doesn't want you to look like everyone else in this room. He wants you to follow Him first and foremost. There's no need to pretend like you're following Jesus if you really aren't. And really for some of us, I think that we can ride the coattails of our parents' faith or maybe a friend's faith. And I want us to really wrestle with, like, God, am I following you? Am I living my life for you? If you've never felt guilty before God, before your sin, if you've never actually felt guilty for sin, I'm sorry, but you're actually not following Jesus. If you've never felt guilty. Because God says we are guilty without Him. And so if you've never felt that, you are not following Jesus. If you've never asked God for forgiveness through Jesus, you're not following Him. If you've never sought God's will for your life, if you've never done that, never once in your life asked God, what do you want from me? It's hard for me to say like you're actually following Him. But praise God that He invites you right now in this moment, not to say, oh crap, I haven't been doing this stuff, but He says right here, right now, pick up your cross and follow me. You can actually follow Him at any moment. You can actually return to Him at any moment. He's calling us right now. All we've got is today. We are not guaranteed tomorrow. So what's it going to look like for us to actually give Him our lives, to give Him our time bomb, to take it off of us? Praise God that He's constantly inviting us to the party. Continuing on in this passage, if I can flip my little notes. So, look, Jesus changes everything. Therefore, we've got to act like it. Look at verse 12 of Titus 2. I'll just start in verse 11 because it continues on. For the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people, training us to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age. If we've been made new, we've got to look. We got to play the part. We have to actually look like it. And I love really this whole idea of like saying no comes from looking at the NIV, which is another version of the Bible. It says it teaches us to say no to ungodliness. The fact that God has given us His grace, He's given us life, has taught us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions, to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives. Really, when I first became a Christian, I started thinking of, okay, God, you've saved me, you've done all of this for me, but does that mean like I get to go out and do what I want now finally? Actually, there was a group on Wednesday that was asking this question. I'm like, are we free to just go out and party? Because, I mean, Jesus has already like done it all for us, right? Hey, we're covered. That means there's no sin that you can separate you from God. Can I just go do what I want now? And really, we ask that question, and I want to pause here, and often we move from it and say, that's a dumb question, never go ask that question. I think that's actually a very valid question to ask. Okay, Jesus, if you've actually taken away all of my sin, what about my sin that I do tomorrow? What about my sin that I do in 20 years? What about the mistakes that I'm going to make? Have you forgiven that? Absolutely. So it's a very valid question for us to sit with, like, am I okay to go and live this way? How many of you guys have gone and seen the movie Shazam, like in the last 2 weeks?
Don't spoil.
I'm not going to spoil it. Anyways, okay, Shazam, I was so surprised. Great movie. Anyways, I'm going to kind of spoil it for Kaylee. Billy Batson is the main character in Shazam, and Billy Batson happens to become a superhero. I'm not ruining it. This is part of the plot. And he becomes a superhero, and he's able to change between being a superhero and being his teenage self. And there's moments when he's able to be one way, and there's moments where he's able to be the other. And part of the major plot of the movie is that Billy just wants to use his superhero self in order to get what he wants, and then he jumps right back into being a teenager and getting away with what he wants in that moment. And really the whole crux of the movie is that Freddie, one of his friends, says, you can't do this, Billy. This is not who you are. You have to step up and save the day because of who you've become. You are this now. You are Shazam. And it's this whole plot of like, you can't just get what you want on both sides, Billy. In the same way, if we're following Jesus, if we've really been changed, we can't just keep jumping back and forth on Sunday and Wednesday. And on Tuesday and Thursday, all of a sudden, we're a different way. At home, we're a different way. With our friends, on our sports teams, like we're just very inconsistent. We're connected in so many ways that don't just look like us. And now we start asking, like, who am I? Because I act so many different ways in every context. We see that Jesus changes everything, and we got to act like it in every context. And really, the reason why, the huge thing for me, is that sin is unlike godness that separates us from Him. So anything that is unlike God's character or what He's asked for us, or anything that can become God in our hearts or in our mind, become the most important thing, become the Lord of us. And really, there's this huge example of it in Matthew 19. I'm actually going to read it for us because I think it's so helpful. Looking at Matthew 19. If you want to jump there, jump back about 50 pages or so to Matthew 19. There's this example of a guy who's actually wrestling with this as well. Never mind. Make that like 100 pages. I turned to the wrong passage. Great. Matthew 19. Looking at verse 16. Big number 19, little number 16. I'm going to break it up in little pieces. So, there's this scene where this guy's about to walk up to Jesus as Jesus is in his ministry. And it says in verse 16, and behold, a man came up to Jesus saying, Teacher, what good deed must I do to have eternal life? This guy who's walking up, he's asking the question, and he's actually asking in a way that shows that he seems really interested. He's calling Jesus teacher. He knows the right answer of saying, okay, how do I inherit eternal life? He's got the right language. And so you see that this guy seems really interested in what Jesus has to say. Great. Looking at verse 17, and he said to him, why do you ask me about what is good? There is only one who is good, if you would enter life and keep the commandments. He said to him, which ones? And Jesus said, you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, honor your father and mother, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. The young man said to him, all these things I have kept. What do I still lack? There's this moment where this young man is so confident before Jesus in this moment, like, I haven't messed up in those ways. All those things that you have said, that I have loved people very, very well, and I want to follow you. I think Jesus in this moment is probably smirking, like, I know you actually haven't honored your mother and father for the last 20 years, kid. Like, you probably haven't done that, but I'm actually not even going to acknowledge that in the moment. And in this moment, Jesus is stating these things because he knows exactly what's on this man's heart, this rich young ruler. And he continues on in verse 21. Jesus said to him, if you would be perfect, go sell what you possess and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Come and follow me. And verse 22 says, when the young man heard this, he went away sorrowful, for he had a great many possessions. Selling his possessions was not going to make him perfect. Cutting that thing out was not going to make him perfect. What Jesus was trying to show in this moment is he's saying, you can't follow me and follow money. And he knew in this moment, as he's interacting with this guy, you're trying to follow me and you're trying to follow money. You're trying to make the decisions in your life, and you want to follow me. You can't have both. And so what's it going to be? Is it going to be money, or is it going to be me? Because if it's going to be me, you've got to show it. What's it going to look like? Go get rid of everything and follow me. The living, breathing God with you right now. And this guy walks away so sad in this moment, saying, I can't do that. I can't do that. 2,000 years later for us, we can sit here and we can think like, oh man, let's roast this guy. Let's just like lay into him right now. Tony's going to talk for the next 8 minutes just laying into this guy of how he failed. But really, let's place ourselves in his shoes. Let's imagine that Jesus walked in here and he was talking directly to you. Jesus, I want to follow you. What do I got to do? He says, have you kept the commandments? And you're like, yeah, kind of, but what do I got to do? What do I got to do, Jesus? What would he say to you? What would he say? Okay, if you want to follow me, go and do this and follow me. What's first and foremost in your heart? What would you be afraid of for him to say? Go and do this and then follow me. What's most important for you? We like to compartmentalize our lives with those different areas that I spoke to. And I had a friend, I had a cup that was somewhere. Does anybody have a cup? Great, thanks Amy. Perfect. I had a friend who had this illustration once talking about we live our lives with the cup, with the party cup, high schoolers. A lot of us in this room probably don't party, but some of us probably do. We live our lives on Saturday with the party cup, but we also have the Bible in our other hands. And we like to live our lives with two hands, right? We've got this one thing over here, and we've got God on Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights and whatever else we can have, and we've kind of got both, one and the other. But the truth is that you only have one heart. You might be living your lives with two hands, but you have one heart. What is your heart most attached to? What would Jesus say for you? Go and do this, and follow me. Matthew 6:24 has this other passage. It says, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. You cannot serve God in partying. You cannot serve God in your need to be liked. You cannot serve God in your addiction. You cannot serve God in your comfort. You cannot serve God in your lust. You cannot serve God in your popularity. You cannot serve God in your cell phone. You cannot serve God in your grades. You cannot serve God in your Instagram. You can't make those things equal. He's saying, what's it going to be? You can't say yes to both things completely. You're going to say no to both things. Or you're going to say no to God and you're going to follow this. Who's really in charge? Saying no to things, saying no to these things and choosing to say yes to Jesus is going to make you look more like Him and grow in your knowledge of Him. You have to be willing to say no to things that aren't Him. If you feel distant from God today, if you actually feel like, God, I don't know where you're at, let me start with this question. When's the last time you let Him speak into your decisions? When's the last time you said no to something for Him? Not to try to prove something, but say, God, I actually choose to say yes to you and no to this. Whether it's sinful or not. God, I choose to say no to this and yes to you. I'll tell you what, He deserves to be in charge. And when He's in charge, our lives are going to look like He's in charge. And you're actually going to feel like you're with Him. Because you're letting Him have a say in your lives. If we are changed by Jesus, if Jesus has taken on our time bomb, and we get to live life with Him for eternity, we've got to act like it. We can't pretend like we've still got a bomb strapped to our chest. We've got to act like, no, I'm actually free to follow you, Jesus, not free to do anything just that I want. What if your life choices actually looked like God had a say in them? What would change for you? Would much change? Would a lot change? I think a lot would change if everything I considered. I'd say, God, what do you have in store for me? Next weekend, we're actually going to be celebrating the fact that everything has changed for us. We're celebrating Easter. And on Good Friday, we're going to be looking at the cross together, that Jesus would literally die, that He would suffer on our behalf so that we could have our sin dealt with and that He would resurrect from the grave. And the rest of this passage in Titus goes on to talk about the hope that we have in Jesus because He defeats the grave. That we get to live our lives so differently and trust the same hope that Paul had is the same hope that we have. And yet in this season of waiting and hoping and trusting that Jesus is working, we're called to say no to ungodliness. We're called to say no to things that are going to push us away from God. Not to prove anything, not to make ourselves look better to God, but because this is just who we are. And actually, I'm going to end on this idea. Often we forget of this concept of fasting, of what it means to fast. And fasting is this spiritual discipline where you remove something from your life that's maybe even a good thing, something you might need, to remove it from your life for a season so that you can rely on God every time you have the urge or the impulse to go to that thing. So often you hear fasting for food because obviously we need it. And so we will fast from food for a day or for 12 hours, or maybe you fast throughout the day, you eat dinner. And it's these moments of not to make yourself feel more holy, but to say, God, I want these things, but I choose to want you more. I choose to desire you more, so I'm giving this up. So I'm actually going to end on this. For the next week, what's one thing in your life that God is calling you to fast from? To remove, so to say no to for a season. Until Easter, to say no to for a season, so that you can say every time you want that thing that you want Him more. And not even to the sense of if you fail, you give up, but to say, oh God, I'm sorry, I messed up. I'm going to start over again right now. For me, I'm actually doing something really small but really huge in my heart. I'm fasting from my phone in the morning. I'm just not even going to touch it. So as soon as that alarm goes off, I hit off and leave it there until I get back to the church. Because so often I can just lay in bed and look at my phone. So often I can get distracted and choose to be on Instagram when nothing's happened in the last 12 hours instead of going to the Word, instead of praying, instead of anything else I could be doing in that moment. And so you know what? Every time I have that moment where I want to grab it in my pocket at 8 a.m., I say, God, know what? You are Lord, and I choose to give this up. So what's it going to be for you? What's God calling you to? And maybe it's that thing that you say you have to give this up in order to follow Him. If you were to walk in this room, maybe that's something you actually should cut out this week. And so I want to give us the next 2-3 minutes to sit, to pray, to ask God, God, what do you call me to? What can I give up this week for your sake to follow you? So you guys can go ahead and spend that time, 2 minutes, praying with the Lord, asking Him, choosing something, being led by Him.